live by that concept of life. And my video just spliced again. Um, but let me see. So you can take someone like a stand-up comedian, take someone like Dave Chappelle. Uh, well, he's just the latest, and but other comedians have come out about how people have become too sensitive, too emotional, and I agree with them. And so I would imagine that a lot of the stand-up comedians, especially the ones who are unapologetic when people say that they were insensitive, that their concept of life includes this idea that people need to be more like the sticks and stones generation. The sticks and stones break my bones, names will never hurt me. Call me this and call me that, and call yourself a big fat rat. And they need to understand that comedians poke fun at anyone and everyone, and just have some thick skin. Don't be so fucking emotional. Don't be so fucking sensitive. Okay, that kind of reminds me of the Charlie Hebdo massacre. Charlie Hebdo apparently is a French comic strip, and um, I was told by some French women that I did a project with back in 2015 that in France they don't want you to wear your religion on your sleeve. They consider religion to be a very private thing. They don't want you going around town with wearing your crucifix or your clerical collar. You know, when you're not actually on the job as a clergyman, clergywoman, take that stuff off and look like the rest of us. The way that America, the way that the U.S. Emphasizes freedom, the French and possibly some other Europeans emphasize blending in, assimilating. These two women, they told me a story of how a plane was either leaving France or landing in France, one of the two. And someone on the plane decided they wanted to get off naked, and they spoke to others. And once a large enough percentage of people on the plane decided to get off the plane naked, everybody else said, okay, we got to go with it. We got to assimilate. We got to blend in. And every single person got off of that plane butt naked because they understood that they just had to assimilate, and this is what the group decided, and they were going to go with what the group decided. And had you been the one person who got off of that plane with your clothes on, you would have looked like the weird one. Okay, you would have been the one that got mocked, not the ones getting off naked. They were in the majority. Okay, and so anyway, getting back to Charlie Hebdo, they said, well, so Charlie Hebdo comic strip, it lampooned all religions, and one day they decided to lampoon Islam, and so I actually did see a picture of what they were offended by. It showed a picture of what, who was supposed to, the guy who was supposed to be the Prophet Muhammad, uh, but his turban around his head was made to look like an old-fashioned bomb, one of those bowling ball style bombs with a fuse on it, and so it kind of made the point that the Prophet Muhammad had begun a violent movement. So then what do they do? These Muslims, they go and they shoot up the Charlie Hebdo office. And so it's interesting that their reaction to the depiction of the Prophet Muhammad actually proved the very point being made by that comic depiction. Okay, you know, so it's like if you don't want people to think that he began a violent movement, then why would you do something violent as soon as they make a depiction of him? And besides that, if it's against Sharia law, a Muslim law, to depict the Prophet Muhammad, in if he lived 600 years ago, or however long ago he lived, um, then how do you even know what he looked like? Okay. So if his death predates cameras, and if there's no portrait of him, then how do you even know how he looked so as to even justify you getting upset about a depiction of him? Come on now. But anyway, I know I'm saying an awful lot, and I'm going longer than I had intended to go. And so this video is not going to be as short as I had hoped it would be. But let me see. Let me get back to my notes now that I've begun to do an awful lot of preaching. Um, okay, so I mentioned all of that. Okay. And so there's this 12th spear of thought, and I'm really tempted not to even finish everything that I have here, but let me see how this goes. So 11th spear of thought is that God element, where you can still get emotional, uh, and you still very much support life, even if it means killing a decent fraction of people because you figure that they are creating a problem for the majority of people, or you just want to use a few people that you execute as examples for the rest of society. And that too is a biblical idea, and it occurs in the New Testament. So I think it might be Romans chapter 13, verse 4, where it says in the New Testament that the king is a servant of God and he beareth not the sword in vain. Okay, so we have New Testament support for a king executing people. Okay, so if you claim to be a churchgoer, a so-called Christian, and you don't support capital punishment, then I don't know. You might not be as Christian as you think you are. You don't like it that I said that? Fuck you. It's that simple. But anyway, let me see. And I think it's Romans between chapter 9 and 10, there are a couple of things that I know are said. I'm not sure which is chapter 9, which is chapter 10. but anyway, between those two chapters, one of them actually mentions the idea that God has created some vessels for honor and some vessels for dishonor, and mentions how that God loved Jacob and hated Esau before they were even born. Yes, it does reiterate that in the book of Romans that God loved Jacob and hated Esau before they were even born, before Esau could have done anything wrong whereby to upset God, before Jacob could have done anything good whereby to please God. God already knew who he loved and who he hated, okay? And it does say that God hated Esau, okay? And I have heard another explanation uh, outside of the Bible itself for why it uses the word hate. Well, long story short, I was in a McDonald's and I saw these two people talking, and this woman tells this man that in the Hebrew language there aren't that many words for emotions, and so the word hate gets used a lot in ways that we wouldn't normally use the word hate uh, in English. But the Hebrew equivalent for hate gets used a lot because there are so few words for emotions in the Hebrew language. Okay, they weren't speaking with me. I didn't make myself part of their conversation. I didn't hear what came before or after that. All I heard was her saying that there are very few words in the Hebrew language for emotions, and so the Hebrew word for hate gets used more than we would use the word hate in English, and it gets used in contexts where we wouldn't normally use the word hate in English. Okay, so that's basically the one argument that I heard against this idea of God hating Esau. I don't know that's the scripture she was discussing, but it could have been. Okay, so there's that. But let me see. So then we get to this 12th sphere of thought. And it, of course, the fourth apocalyptic course, I believe, corresponds with this with this 12th sphere of thought. So the first 8 spheres of thought are not even addressed in Revelation chapter 6, or any chapter of Revelation, uh, as far as I know. And so God basically begins the conversation, if you will, at the point of rationale. And honestly, I believe that it's because God insists that everyone in society be, at the very least, rational. Now, those who can't be rational, maybe they don't belong out in public. But if you're going to be in public, you need to be rational. And so, I do support gender equality, but you got to be rational. Can't come out in public with those emotional ways, okay? Call it what you will, but I'm just telling you like it is, that you can't come out in public and be tossing around all those emotions, that emotional thought pattern, okay? You're really screwing up society when you do that. And I do believe that Satan is a female. Uh, God does evil, Satan does evil, okay? But God is male, Satan is female. And you see, scriptures that reference Satan, especially in the book of Isaiah, I believe it's chapter 14, verses 12 through 14, refers to Satan as thou which dost weaken the nations. And I believe the way that Satan weakens the nations is by using Job's wife to tempt Job, using Eve to tempt Adam, using the 300 wives and 700 concubines, or is it the other way around, to tempt Solomon, who fell for the temptation like Adam did. Job rose above the temptation, but in a number of different instances, we have stories of Satan using the woman to tempt the man. Satan probably used Delilah to tempt Samson to tell the secret of his strength, and we see what that led to. And then after giving the order to have 450 prophets of Baal killed, Elijah runs from Jezebel, Queen Jezebel. Okay, and so throughout the Bible we have men being brought down by women, but like I said, well, maybe not in the video, this video, but I've said a number of times over the years that I don't think God puts women in hell. He might kill them, like Jezebel got killed for doing evil in this life once they get across a certain point anyway. Some of them just get to be too evil, like Jezebel, and God may have them killed. But in many instances, God actually doesn't punish women. When the Hebrews were crossing the desert and they began to murmur and complain against Moses, God said, the males who are at least 20 years old, will die in the desert. He didn't punish the women at all, but at least not for that. Miriam eventually crossed a certain line and she got punished. When the cloud lifted off of her, she was white as snow. But make what you will of that. But anyway, so the 12th sphere of thought corresponds with the fourth apocalyptic horse. The fourth apocalyptic horse was a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death. and Hades followed close behind. So with the first three uh, horsemen, the Bible actually gives us some details pertaining to the missions they were given, uh, their characteristics, and what have you, beyond just the color of the horse. But um, but in this case, it just says the horse was a pale horse, and the rider's name was Death. And it doesn't say that he was sent out to bring famine or war or to conquer lands. Just the rider's name was Death. Okay. But then it says Hades follows close behind. So, anyway, how does that correspond to the mind? Well, let me go back to what I said about the storm. So, in a previous segment, I mentioned how that in a hurricane, you have the eye of the storm, where it's actually the calmest part of the storm, where nothing's actually happening, and that space right around the eye is actually the fiercest part of the storm. So the eye might be 2 miles in diameter, and then as you go out in all directions from the edge of the eye for the next 10 miles in all directions, or 22-mile diameter, you have some really fierce winds, 150 miles an hour or better, and then it tapers off as you get further out. Okay, so I did talk about how as the storm gets more organized, the eye shrinks, or as the eye shrinks, the storm gets more organized and more intense. I don't know which is cause and which is effect, but in any instance, to further build on that parallel, that very real life parallel. I mean, you can ask those who lived through Andrew, you can ask those who lived through Katrina, okay? You can ask those who lived through Harvey, and I actually have a friend who has a friend who got caught in all three storms. He moved after he got wiped out by Andrew, and then he got wiped out by Katrina, and then he moved again, and he got wiped out by Harvey. But anyway, so maybe he needs to avoid the Gulf states altogether, but and the Atlantic states as well. But so I mentioned how that the eye gets smaller, the storm gets more intense, but actually I can build a little bit more on this storm idea by saying that 11th sphere of thought, that demigodhood, actually would correspond best with the area right around the eye, not the eye itself. And the eye of the storm is pretty much corresponds with that 12th sphere of thought. The eye is where nothing happens. The eye is perfectly calm. And why is that analogy, why is that parallel so important? Well, here's why. Because, like I said, no one is born with more than 10 spheres of thought in their mind. The 10th innermost sphere being the conceptual thought that transcends rationale. And so then the guy thinks himself into godhood, becomes a demigod, and that 11th sphere of thought developing inside, at the center of his mind, inside of his conceptual thought, leads to his mind being further organized and more intense, just like the storm gets further organized and more intense. But if you develop this 12th and final sphere of thought in your mind, it actually has the reverse effect. So that 11th sphere of thought is that area right around the eye of the storm. And it's where you have the highest winds and the most fierceness, possibly some lightning. You actually don't get a lot of lightning with hurricanes, but it's the fiercest part of the storm. And then, if you could fly through the storm, through the fiercest part, and get into the eye, and stay there, and travel with the eye, move with the eye, you would actually not feel any harm whatsoever, as long as you kept moving with that eye, and you didn't get to the area right outside of it. So, how does that translate into how the mind works? Well, I mentioned earlier that I believe God has actually created some parallels in nature that teach us about what's going on inside of us. And one of these parallels is that this 12th sphere of thought in the mind, this one that corresponds with death, well, that's the point at which you just stop projecting your concept of life and just kind of accept that societal death is on the way. You just accept that this or that type of death is on the way. You think a lot about the cosmos, and I don't just mean stars and planets, but about universal law, not universal from state to state, not universal from country to country, but universal as in the universe itself. Because while I definitely won't say that God had a quote-unquote beginning, I do believe that God became aware of this inanimate set of laws in the universe that he had to consider, and those inanimate laws, even though they don't exist in an embodied being, they do affect creation, or they do affect God's ability to create, and he had to figure out how to overcome this disembodied set of universal laws out there in the cosmos that can adversely affect him. Okay, and I will actually go so far as to say that, thinking back to Brother Steve, that teacher slash principal at the Christian school in New Jersey, I vaguely recall him saying something to the effect of thinking that this was either the third world that God had created, or maybe the third civilization that God had created in this world, or something to that effect. I don't recall exactly what it was. It was not during a class. It was during some kind of leisurely conversation, maybe during rec time or lunchtime, something like that. But in any instance, it wasn't part of a class, and I just happened to pass by and hear a little bit of what he was saying, and now I kind of wish that I had stopped and heard that entire explanation. But in any instance, that's neither here nor there, because through a different train of thought, I on my own have come to the conclusion that this is actually the third universal order. He might not have actually been talking about that. He might have just meant the third civilization on this planet. I almost recall him mentioning the Genesis flood, and that would account for two different civilizations on this planet, the pre-Genesis flood and the post-Genesis flood, after only one family lived and repopulated the earth. So I'm not sure where the first of three world civilizations would have come from. Maybe he thought there was, the dinosaur age, and then they died off, and then somehow humans came along. I don't know, but I believe that God was actually a disembodied, very powerful soul slash mind out in the blackness of space, or maybe it wasn't always black. Maybe he made it black. I don't know. He said he forms light and creates darkness. He makes good and creates evil. But I believe that whatever color the universe was, God was just out there as a disembodied soul in the midst of this vast nothingness, and that he did a lot of thinking, and he began to create, and he really emphasized his right as dictator to do whatever the heck he wants to do, and it probably stressed out whatever he created. I don't know how many billions of men or women or animals or whatever he created. I don't know what he created in that first order, but I believe that at some point the stress level across his creation got so high that this inanimate set of universal laws just kind of caused everything to implode. It just started at the outer reaches of the universe and pushed in and balled up all of creation, uh, and reversed everything. And God still existed, but he had to start over. Only this time he was aware of this